There is a piece of equipment that every wildland firefighter in America carries and prays they will never open. It folds down to the size of a rolled-up sleeping bag, aluminum foil, silica, fiberglass. They call it a fire shelter, but the people who carry it call it something else. The last resort, the shake and bake. You deploy it only when the fire has won, when there is no road out and no time left, and you lie face down in the dirt under a thin metal skin, and you hope the flame front passes over you fast enough. This past Saturday, near the Colorado and Utah border, 3 firefighters had to open theirs. They did not survive. By the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly what a burnover is, why it killed 3 trained professionals who did everything right, why the state of Utah issued a fire weather warning 2 days earlier that had never, not once, been issued in its history, and why almost no one talking about this fire is telling you about the danger that comes after the flames go out. You are going to understand all of it, and I think, by the end, you are going to feel the same thing the scientists who study this feel, which is not panic. It is something quieter and worse. This is the Horizon Lab. If you want the truth about the natural world, the verified truth, with the sources on the screen and no fairy tales, subscribe and stay with me. And do me a favor, tell me in the comments where you are watching from, because by the end of this you are going to look at the sky over your own town a little differently. Let's get into it. It started small. It almost always does. A vegetation fire reported just after noon near a campground in the Fishlake National Forest in southern Utah, about 5 miles west of the town of Beaver. Within hours it was 1,000 acres. By that first night it was 10,000. And it did not stop. As of this recording, that fire, the Cottonwood Fire, has burned close to 94,000 acres. That is more than 140 square miles of mountain and forest and canyon. It is, right now, the largest active wildfire in the United States. And here is the number that should stop you. After almost a full week of burning, after hundreds of firefighters, after helicopters and air tankers and bulldozers carving lines into the earth, the containment on this fire is 0%. Not 10, not 5, 0. Let me say that again, because it matters. The biggest fire in the country, nearly 100,000 acres, and the people fighting it have not been able to get a single percentage point of control over its edge. That is the situation we are walking into, and the 3 firefighters who died were not on the Cottonwood Fire itself. They were a few hours to the east, across the state line in Colorado, fighting a different blaze that had grown out of 2 smaller fires that merged together. Same drought, same wind, same impossible week. We are going to walk through all of it, carefully, in order. What burned? Who was lost? Why the science of this is more frightening than any conspiracy theory you have seen in your feed, and what the maps say is coming next, the part that has nothing to do with fire at all. Stay with me. So let's get the full picture on the table, because the scale of what is happening across the American West right now is hard to hold in your head all at once. Start with the Cottonwood Fire, the big one. It ignited on Monday, the 22nd of June, near the Cottonwood campground in the Fishlake National Forest. The US Forest Service has said the fire was human-caused. The specific cause, how exactly it started, is still under investigation as of this recording, and we are going to come back to that word, investigation, later, because the internet has already decided it knows the answer, and the internet is wrong. In its very first day, the fire blew past 10,000 acres. By the 24th, it was over 60,000. By the morning of the 27th, it had crossed 90,000, and by Sunday, it had grown to more than 146 square miles. To put that in plain terms, this single fire is now larger than the entire city of Denver, and it is burning in rugged, broken country, steep slopes and red rock and deep canyons, the kind of terrain where, as one spokesperson on the fire put it, you cannot get the dozers in and you cannot get the engines in. The land itself is fighting on the side of the fire. The damage is already historic. The fire has torn through Eagle Point Resort, a ski area, causing significant structural damage. It has forced mandatory evacuations across a string of communities. High-Low Estates, Merchant Valley, Arrowhead Summer Homes. Power has been knocked out across parts of the county, and the utility, Rocky Mountain Power, made the decision to deliberately shut off its own transmission lines serving Beaver County, because in conditions this dry, a single spark from a power line is enough to start the next fire. The governor of Utah, Spencer Cox, said there is a very good chance this is already the most destructive wildfire in the state's history. Now widen the lens, because Cottonwood is not alone. As of Sunday afternoon, there were around 12 separate wildfires burning in the state of Utah, 4 of them brand new, and not one of them contained. Across the wider West, in Utah and Colorado and Nevada and Arizona, roughly a dozen large, uncontrolled fires were burning at the same time. South of Grand Canyon National Park, flames pushed close enough that authorities issued evacuation orders near Kendrick Mountain, and parts of northern Arizona lost power as utilities cut their own lines to lower the risk. Here is the national number, from the National Interagency Fire Center. Since the start of this year, nearly 4,700 square miles of the United States have burned. That is already more than the 10-year average, and we are not even into the heart of the fire season yet. This is why 2 governors, in 2 different states, declared emergencies inside the same week. In Utah, Cox declared a state of emergency and cleared the way for something that tells you everything about how nervous officials are. The state moved to ban fireworks ahead of the 4th of July, the nation's 250th Independence Day, in a country where lighting things on fire in your backyard in July is practically a birthright. Across the line in Colorado, Governor Jared Polis declared his own emergency and authorized the National Guard to help fight the fires. Think about what it takes to get to that point. 2 states, the National Guard, a fireworks ban on the biggest patriotic holiday of the half-century. That is not a normal fire year, and the people on the ground had been warned. 2 days before those 3 firefighters died, the National Weather Service reached for a tool it had never used in Utah before. We will get to exactly what that warning was. First, you need to understand the thing it was warning about. You need to understand a burnover. A wildfire is not really a wall of flame. That is the picture we carry in our heads, a tall orange curtain moving across a field. But that picture is wrong, and the wrongness of it is exactly what kills people. A wildfire is a system. It is heat, fuel, oxygen, wind, and terrain, all feeding each other in a loop. And like any system with feedback in it, it does not move smoothly. It surges. It jumps. It can sit quiet and creeping for an hour, and then, when the wind shifts and the slope steepens and the fuel dries just past a threshold, it can do something that looks less like burning and more like an explosion in slow motion. That is a burnover. The official definition is almost gentle. A burnover happens when a fire spreads and closes off all the escape routes surrounding the people fighting it. But strip away the calm language, and here is what it means on the ground. The fire gets behind you. The way out that was open 10 minutes ago is now a wall, and the fire is moving faster than a person can run. How fast can a fire move? On flat ground, in light wind, a grass fire can travel several miles an hour, which sounds slow until you remember it never gets tired and it never stops. But fire does not like flat ground. Fire loves a slope. For every 10 degrees of incline, the rate of spread can roughly double, because the flames lean into the unburned fuel above them, preheating it, drying it, lighting it before the fire even arrives. A canyon becomes a chimney, and then add wind. Wind does 2 things at once. It bends the flame forward onto new fuel, and it throws burning embers ahead of the fire, sometimes a mile or more, starting brand new fires in front of the old one. Those new fires are called spot fires, and when enough of them light at once, the ground in front of you is suddenly the ground behind you. The escape route is gone. That is the trap closing. Now think about the fuel this year. The single most important number in all of fire science is fuel moisture, the percentage of water inside the grass and brush and timber. Living plants in spring might hold 200% moisture by dry weight. The dead grass and scrub feeding these western fires has been measured in single digits, 2%, 5%, drier than the lumber you would buy at a hardware store. When fuel is that dry, it does not need to be warmed up much before it ignites. It is, in the language of the people who study this, available. All of it, all at once. And here is the cruel part. When everything goes wrong, when the burnover is unavoidable, a firefighter has one last option: the fire shelter. That aluminum and silica cocoon I described at the start. You clear a spot down to bare dirt if you can. You climb in, you pin the edges down with your hands and feet, and you put your face into the cool ground and breathe the thin layer of survivable air near the soil while the fire front roars over the top of you. It is designed to reflect radiant heat and trap breathable air. It has saved lives. Hundreds of them. But it has limits, and those limits are physics, not courage. A fire shelter is built to survive a fast-moving flame front passing over. It is not built to survive direct, sustained contact with flame, or the kind of superheated gas that comes when heavy fuel burns long and hot in one place. If the fire sits on top of you instead of sweeping past, if the temperature climbs past what the foil can reflect, the shelter is not enough. The firefighters near the Colorado border on Saturday deployed their shelters. They did the trained, correct, last resort thing, and for 3 of them, in those conditions, on that ground, it was not enough. That is what we need to talk about next. Not the fire, the people. I want to be careful here, and honest with you, because this is the part where a lot of channels would invent something. They would give you a name, a quote, a tearful detail they have no way of knowing. I am not going to do that. What I am going to give you is only what is confirmed, on the record, from the US Department of the Interior and the agencies involved, because the truth is heavy enough. Here is what we know. On Saturday, in Mesa County, Colorado, 3 firefighters were killed and 2 more were injured when they were overcome by flames in hot, windy conditions. They were caught in a burnover. They deployed their emergency shelters, the last resort, and 3 of them did not come home. The 2 who were injured suffered burns. They were not freelancers and they were not amateurs. They were part of an interagency response, which means crews from different federal agencies working the same fire together. Specifically, they worked for the US Forest Service and for the US Wildland Fire Service. They had been fighting 2 fires, the Knowles Fire and the Gore Fire, which had merged with other fires in that dry stretch of scrub and red mesa to become what is now called the Snyder Fire. By Sunday, that fire had burned around 44 square miles. The names of the 3 who died are being withheld. The Interior Department said it is holding them back until the families have been notified, which is the right thing to do, and which means that at the moment I am recording this, somewhere there are families who have just received the worst phone call of their lives, or are about to. I am not going to speculate about who they were. When the names are released, you will be able to read them, and I would ask you to. What I can tell you is the context they were working in, because it matters. The US Wildland Fire Service is new. It was created earlier this year, in 2026, as a reorganization meant to streamline how the federal government fights fire across public lands and reduces the fuel that feeds it. This fire season is, in a real sense, its first major test, and this weekend it suffered its first line of duty deaths. In a statement, the Wildland Fire Service said it stands united with the Forest Service in grief and in support of the loved ones left behind. They said the bravery and sacrifice of the fallen will never be forgotten. I want to put one number next to that grief, not to diminish it, but to frame it. The temperature in Grand Junction, the nearest city to the east of that fire, hit 93 degrees Fahrenheit on Sunday, with winds gusting to 44 miles an hour. That is the envelope these crews were operating in. Heat that pulls the last moisture out of the brush, and wind strong enough to throw a fire across a canyon in seconds. The Mesa County Sheriff's Office was telling residents to evacuate and to turn on their irrigation water, to soak the ground around their own homes, because there were not enough crews and not enough hours to protect everything. This is the human cost, stated plainly. 3 dead, 2 burned, families waiting on notifications, a brand new agency burying its first. And I want you to hold on to something, because we are going to need it later. These 3 firefighters did not die because they made a mistake. Everything we know says they followed their training to the final step. They died because the conditions on that mountain, on that day, were beyond what training and equipment are built to survive. Remember that. Because when we get to the part of this story where people start blaming lasers and secret weapons and government plots, the real answer, the boring, terrifying, physical answer, is going to be sitting right here. The land was a bomb, and we are the ones who primed it. 2 days before those 3 firefighters died in Colorado, something happened in a forecast office in Salt Lake City that had never happened before. Not once. Not in the entire recorded history of that office. Let me explain what it was, because the language matters. If you live in the American West, you have probably heard of a red flag warning. The National Weather Service issues one when the conditions are right for wildfires to start easily and spread fast. Low humidity, strong wind, dry fuel. It is a common warning. People who live in fire country see them every summer, and after a while, if we are honest, they start to tune them out. Another red flag day, another reminder to be careful with the grill. But on Friday, the 26th of June, the Weather Service in Salt Lake City reached past the ordinary red flag warning and pulled out something stronger. They issued what is called a particularly dangerous situation, PDS for short. Here is the part that should make the hair on your neck stand up. That phrase, particularly dangerous situation, does not come from the world of wildfire. It was borrowed. It is a designation normally reserved for the most extreme, high-probability tornado outbreaks, the days when forecasters are genuinely afraid that a violent, life-threatening event is not just possible, but likely. They took that language, the language of a monster tornado day, and they applied it to fire. And it was the first time they had ever done it. One of the meteorologists, a man named Jason Straub, stood up at a public meeting in the auditorium of Beaver High School and told the people in that room, plainly, that the Salt Lake City office had never issued one of these warnings, ever. Another officer with the Weather Service called the situation extremely concerning. These are not people who reach for dramatic words. Their entire profession is built on calibrated, careful, hedged language. And they were telling a high school auditorium full of frightened residents that they had run out of ordinary words. What triggered it? A specific, measurable combination. Humidity dropping below 10%. That is desert dry, drier than the inside of your home in winter. Wind gusts forecast up to 50 miles an hour. Vegetation cured past the point of no return. And, sitting in the middle of all of it, a large, active, uncontrolled wildfire ready to be thrown across the landscape. Under those conditions, the forecasters warned, any new fire, or any existing fire, could spread very rapidly and could throw spot fires across long distances, miles ahead of the front. The warning took effect Friday morning. The 3 firefighters were caught in their burnover the next day, Saturday, in exactly the kind of explosive, wind-driven behavior that warning was built to describe. I want to be clear about what I am saying and what I am not. The warning did not fail. The forecasters did their job, and they did it early, and they did it loudly. The tragedy is not that no one saw it coming. The tragedy is that everyone saw it coming. The warning was as severe as the science allows, and the fire was still beyond stopping. That is a different and more unsettling kind of fear. It is the fear of knowing, in advance, in detail, and being able to do nothing but get out of the way. So how did the land get to this point? How does a forest become a thing that even a perfect warning cannot save you from? For that, we have to talk about water, specifically, about 24 years of the missing kind. To understand why this fire behaves the way it does, you have to stop thinking about this one summer and start thinking about this 1/4 of a century. Since roughly the year 2000, the American Southwest and the entire Colorado River basin that feeds it has been locked in a drought. Not a bad season, not a dry few years, a drought that scientists who study tree rings, who can read the moisture in the wood going back more than 1,000 years, have called the worst stretch of dryness in this region in about 1,200 years. Let me put that in human terms. The last time this land was this dry, for this long, there was no United States. There was no English language as we would recognize it. The medieval warm period was just beginning in Europe. That is the scale of what is happening underneath this fire. They have a name for it now, the Megadrought. And the word is not hype. It is the technical term for a drought that lasts decades, and this one has. Now layer this past year on top of that 24-year baseline. Utah just came through its warmest winter on record. Its mountain snowpack, the frozen reservoir that is supposed to melt slowly through spring and keep the soil and the forests damp into summer, came in at record lows. The snow that should have been feeding the streams and the roots in June simply was not there. And so by the time these fires started, the moment a spark touched the brush, the vegetation was not just dry. As of the warning, around 94% of the entire state of Utah was in some level of drought. This is what fire scientists mean when they talk about fuel loading and fuel availability. A forest is, in the coldest physical sense, a pile of stored carbon waiting for an excuse to combine with oxygen. Normally, the water inside the living and dead plants acts as a brake. It has to be boiled off before the material can ignite, and that takes energy, and that slows everything down. Strip the water out, year after year, and you remove the brake. The same forest that would smolder and self-extinguish in a wet year becomes, in a year like this one, a continuous bed of fuel that carries flame as fast as the wind can push it. And here is the uncomfortable human part of the equation, the part the official numbers make impossible to ignore. Out of the hundreds of wildfires tracked in Utah since the start of this year, the large majority were not started by lightning. They were started by people. State data indicates that of the several hundred fires recorded, well over 200 were confirmed human-caused, accounting for more than 3/4 of all the acreage burned. A dragged trailer chain throwing sparks, a campfire not fully drowned, a mower blade striking a rock. In a normal year, most of those sparks die in damp grass. In this year, in this megadrought, almost any of them can become a 100,000-acre fire. So when you hear an official say the cause is human-caused but under investigation, understand the full weight of it. It does not necessarily mean arson. It does not mean a plot. It usually means a small, ordinary human mistake, landing on a landscape that has been turned into kindling by 24 years of missing water. The land was the bomb. A person, almost certainly without meaning to, was the match. But the fire is only the first disaster. The second one is already being written into the mountainside, and it will arrive with the rain. Here is the danger that almost no one covering this fire is talking about, and it is the one that may end up doing the most lasting harm. When this fire finally goes out, when the last hotspot is cold and the crews go home and the news cameras leave, the mountain it leaves behind will not be safe. In some ways, it will be more dangerous than it was while it was burning, because a severe wildfire does not just remove the trees and the brush, it changes the ground itself. Let me explain the mechanism, because it is genuinely counterintuitive. When a fire burns hot enough, the intense heat does something strange to the soil. It vaporizes the waxy, oily compounds in the burned vegetation, and those vapors sink down into the dirt and condense into a thin, water-repellent layer just below the surface. Scientists call this hydrophobic soil. The ground becomes, in effect, waterproofed. At the same time, the fire incinerates all the roots and plants and leaf litter that used to hold the slope together and soak up the rain like a sponge. So now picture what happens when the rains come back. And in the desert southwest, they come back violently, in the form of the summer monsoon, sudden intense thunderstorms that dump an inch of water in an hour. That rain hits a steep, blackened slope, with no plants to slow it, no roots to grip the soil, and a waterproof layer just under the surface that will not let it soak in. The water has nowhere to go but down, and it takes the loose ash and soil and rock with it. What comes off that mountain is not a clean flood of water. It is a debris flow, a churning, fast-moving slurry of mud, ash, charred logs and boulders that can move faster than a person can run and can bury a road, a car, or a home in minutes. This is not a hypothetical. Burn scars produce deadly debris flows across the West every single year, often killing people months after the fire that created the scar is long forgotten. And this particular burn scar sits in the watershed of the Beaver River, water that ultimately drains toward the Colorado River system, the same network of rivers and reservoirs that supplies drinking water to tens of millions of Americans across 7 states and feeds reservoirs like Lake Powell. A massive load of ash and sediment washing off this burn does not just threaten the people directly downhill, it degrades water quality far downstream, clogging reservoirs and fouling supplies in a basin that, as we just discussed, is already running on empty. And there is a second, faster threat, one that is already here, that does not require any rain at all: smoke. The Cottonwood Fire has been pumping enormous plumes of smoke into the sky, plumes so large and hot they have generated their own clouds, towering pyrocumulonimbus formations, fire-made thunderstorms. That smoke is loaded with fine particulate matter, the microscopic particles small enough to slip past your body's defenses and lodge deep in your lungs and pass into your bloodstream. And it does not stay over Utah. Reports of degraded air quality and smoke have already come in from well outside the state, drifting over Moab and reaching toward northern Arizona and beyond. Tens of millions of people, many of them hundreds of miles from any flame, will breathe a little bit of this fire. For the elderly, for children, for anyone with asthma or heart disease, that is its own quiet emergency, arriving just as the country crowds outdoors for the 4th of July. The flames are the headline. The water and the air are the story that outlasts it. Remember that, because the people whose job it is to manage all of this are operating inside a system that, this very year, is being tested for the very first time. I told you earlier that the 3 firefighters who died were working, in part, for an agency called the U.S. Wildland Fire Service. I want to come back to that, because there is a piece of this story hiding inside that name, and it is a piece almost no headline has picked up. The U.S. Wildland Fire Service did not exist a year ago. It was created earlier in 2026, a major reorganization within the federal government, built to pull together and streamline the way the country fights fire and manages the fuel that feeds it across hundreds of millions of acres of public land. For decades, that job had been split, awkwardly, across multiple agencies, the Forest Service inside the Department of Agriculture, and several land agencies inside the Department of the Interior, each with its own crews, its own budgets, its own chain of command. The idea behind the new service was to unify that, to make the response faster and the coordination cleaner. It is on paper a sensible reform, but here is the reality. This fire season is its first real trial by fire, and I mean that almost literally. A brand new agency, with new lines of authority and new procedures, is being thrown into one of the most violent fire starts in recent memory. And this past weekend, in the worst possible way, it crossed a threshold no agency ever wants to cross. It suffered what are believed to be among its first line of duty deaths. Think about the weight of that. An organization barely a few months old, still working out who reports to whom, still merging cultures and radios and protocols from the legacy agencies it absorbed, now has to do the hardest thing a fire organization ever does: notify families, honor the fallen, investigate what went wrong, with full integrity, while the fire that killed its people is still burning at 0% containment. The service put out a statement saying it stands united with the Forest Service in grief and in support of the families left behind. Those are the right words. But the test of a new institution is not its words in the first week. It is whether the coordination actually holds when everything is on fire at once. And right now, everything is. Consider the strain these crews are under. In a single 24-hour stretch, Utah saw around 18 new fires ignite. The state has tracked hundreds of wildfires since January. Officials have said the cost of the response has already climbed into the tens of millions of dollars, and the season is young. Hundreds of firefighters have been flowing into the state from elsewhere just to keep up with the new starts, let alone contain the old ones. The state forester described fire behavior this year as unprecedented, each new fire stretching the state's firefighting capability further. When you stretch any system far enough, the failures stop being individual and start being structural. A crew gets assigned to a fire with thinner support than it should have. A resource that should have been available is 200 miles away on another fire. The margins that keep people alive get thinner. I am not telling you the new agency caused these deaths. There is no evidence of that, and it would be irresponsible to claim it. The conditions alone, the wind and the drought and the terrain, are a complete and sufficient explanation for what happened on that ridge in Colorado. What I am telling you is that the human system we have built to stand between us and these fires is, this year, simultaneously brand new, under enormous strain, and facing a fire environment that keeps breaking its own records. That is worth watching, carefully, because the fire is not going to wait for the paperwork to settle. Now, we have talked about this fire and this year, but to really feel why this matters, you have to understand that we have stood exactly here before, almost to the day. and it cost 19 lives. Almost exactly 13 years ago, on a ridge in central Arizona, this same story played out. And it is the reason that, for a lot of people in the fire world, the news from this weekend hit like a fist. The date was the 30th of June, 2013. As many of you watch this, that anniversary is right now. And the crew was the Granite Mountain Hotshots, a 20-person interagency hotshot crew based out of the Prescott Fire Department. Hotshots are the elite of wildland firefighting, intensively trained, nationally deployed, the people sent into the worst of it to cut line by hand where no engine can reach. These were not weekend volunteers. These were the best in the country at exactly this job. The Yarnell Hill fire had been ignited by dry lightning 2 days earlier, on the 28th. Small at first, it almost always is. By the 30th, it was threatening the town of Yarnell, and the Granite Mountain crew was working the south end of the fire, building line, doing everything by the book. And then, in the early afternoon, the weather turned. A thunderstorm outflow slammed into the fire and shoved it in a new direction, straight toward them, and it did so faster than anyone could react. Here is the detail that I need you to sit with, because it connects directly to this weekend. The investigators later reconstructed it almost minute by minute. The fire was moving at something like 10 to 12 miles an hour. The crew was caught moving through unburned brush, trying to reach a safety zone, a ranch down below them. They never made it. They dropped into a box canyon, the worst possible place, thick with chaparral, and they had less than 2 minutes. 2 minutes to clear a spot and deploy their fire shelters. They deployed them close together, side by side, the way they were trained. And the fire that came over them was so intense, the temperature so far beyond what aluminum foil can reflect, with flame in direct contact rather than sweeping past, that the shelters could not save them. Investigators concluded the conditions at that deployment site were simply not survivable. "19 of the 20 died. 19. It was the deadliest day for American wildland firefighters since 1933. The only one who lived was a 21-year-old named Brendan McDonough, and the only reason he lived is that he had been posted away from the others, up on a knoll, serving as the crew's lookout, watching the fire so he could warn them. He radioed them about the danger, and then he had to save himself. Now, the part that matters for the larger story. An investigation by the state of Arizona later found that fire officials had, in its words, put the protection of property ahead of the safety of the crews, and concluded they should have pulled the firefighters out earlier. The state's forestry division was fined. Whether you accept every finding of that report, and some of it has been disputed for years, the central lesson landed hard across the entire profession. The lesson was this: no house, no cabin, no patch of ground is worth a single firefighter's life. The mountains do not care what we build on them. 13 years later, almost to the day, in the same kind of drought, in the same final days of June, 3 more firefighters deployed those same shelters, on the same losing side of the same physics. The fire shelter saves lives. It has saved many. But its limit is not a flaw in the equipment. Its limit is the truth that there are fires no human being is meant to be standing near, and the maps are making more of those fires, not fewer. We have to go back one more time, because there is an even older grave in a place that should make every one of us pay attention. Go back another 19 years to 1994, and you find the tragedy that, in many ways, created modern wildland firefighting safety, and you find it in a place that should stop you cold, given what just happened this weekend. Storm King Mountain, 7 miles west of Glenwood Springs, Colorado. And here is the part to hold on to. That mountain sits roughly 2 miles from Interstate 70, the great east-west highway of the Central Rockies, in the same stretch of western Colorado, the same Grand Junction district, where those 3 firefighters were killed in their burnover just days ago. The same corridor, the same kind of country, 32 years apart. In the summer of 1994, western Colorado was deep in drought. June of that year was, at the time, recorded as the hottest month in the state's history. Glenwood Springs had seen rainfall around 40% below normal for the previous 8 months. Sound familiar? On the 2nd of July, a dry lightning storm sparked dozens of new fires across the region in a single stretch, more than 40 of them, and firefighting resources were stretched to the breaking point. One of those fires started on Storm King Mountain. Because it was small and remote, and because so many other fires demanded attention first, it was given low priority and allowed to smolder for 2 days. By the time crews engaged it seriously, it had grown teeth. On the 6th of July, a dry cold front pushed through. The wind jumped to 40-45 miles an hour, and the fire did exactly what fire does in those conditions. It threw a spot fire down below the crews who were working a line on the steep west flank, in oak brush so dense and so tall it was nearly impossible to walk through. That spot fire caught the slope and ran uphill toward them, and as it climbed, it accelerated. From around 3 miles an hour to 11, the flames rising 150-200 feet into the air. The fire reached the ridgeline in about 2 minutes. 2 minutes. The same brutal window as Yarnell. Some of the firefighters ran for the ridge and made it, barely, singed and burned. Others bailed off the side into a gully in what one survivor described as total organized panic. But 14 of them could not outrun it. 9 hotshots from Prineville, Oregon, 3 smoke jumpers, 2 helicopter crew members, some tried to deploy their shelters. Against that blow-up, there was no defense. And here is the thing that makes Storm King the hinge point of this entire history. A red flag warning had been in effect that day. The conditions were known. People asked, immediately and angrily, why crews were on that mountain at all when the forecast was screaming danger. The investigation that followed found that nearly all of the 10 standard firefighting orders, the core safety commandments of the profession, and many of the 18 watch-out situations had been compromised. And out of that grief came reform. The way America fights fire, the way it talks about escape routes and safety zones and lookouts, the modern safety culture of the entire field, was forged in large part on the side of that mountain. So sit with the full shape of this for a second. 1994, Storm King, 14 dead, red flag warning in effect. 2013, Yarnell, 19 dead, drought and a wind shift. 2026, this past Saturday, the same western Colorado corridor, a first ever, particularly dangerous situation warning in effect. 3 more dead. 32 years of the hardest possible lessons, and the fire keeps finding the same answer. Why? Why does the mountain keep winning? Even now, even after everything we have learned, that is what we have to understand next. So let's answer the question directly. After Storm King rewrote the safety rules, after Yarnell broke the profession's heart, after 30 years of investigations and reforms and better equipment, how does a burnover still kill 3 trained firefighters in 2026? Part of the answer is geography. The same shape of land keeps appearing in these stories, and it is not a coincidence. Look at what Storm King and Yarnell and this weekend's burnover have in common. Steep slopes, narrow drainages and canyons, and dense low brush, the oak brush, the chaparral, the gamble oak that grows thick and tangled and full of volatile oils. Put those 3 ingredients together, and you build what amounts to a furnace with a chimney. The canyon funnels and accelerates the wind. The slope tilts the flames forward onto the fuel above, preheating it. And the brush, when it goes, does not burn politely from one edge. It flashes, all at once, releasing an enormous pulse of heat in seconds. A firefighter standing in that terrain when the wind turns is not facing a line of fire creeping toward them. They are facing a slope that can become entirely involved, top to bottom, faster than they can climb out of it. And notice the other thing these tragedies share. In every single one, the killing blow was a spot fire, an ember thrown ahead or below the crew by the wind, landing in unburned fuel and igniting a new fire between the firefighters and their safety. That is the trap. You can be watching the main fire perfectly, doing everything right, and the fire can simply leapfrog behind you. At Storm King, the spot fire came up from below. At Yarnell, the fire shifted and cut off the route to the ranch. The escape route that existed 5 minutes ago is gone, and you have, as we keep seeing, about 2 minutes. Now, here is what is genuinely better than it was. After Storm King, the profession built its safety doctrine around 4 things, and firefighters drill them until they are reflex. Lookouts, communications, escape routes, safety zones. Always post someone watching the fire, like the lookout, who was the only Granite Mountain survivor. Always keep radio contact. Always know your way out, and always have a place that will not burn. The fire shelters themselves were redesigned and improved after these tragedies. Incident meteorologists, like the ones who issued that historic warning in Utah, now embed with fires to forecast the exact wind shifts that kill. And the entire culture shifted, at least on paper, away from dying to protect a structure. After Yarnell, the message was hammered home. Property is replaceable, people are not. So the system is real, and it works, and it has without question saved many lives that the 1994 version of firefighting would have lost. But here is the hard, honest truth, and it is the truth this whole video has been building toward. All of that doctrine manages risk, it does not eliminate it, because the one variable the doctrine cannot control is the one that is changing fastest, the fuel. When you take a landscape and dry it out for 24 straight years, when you give it the warmest winter on record and the lowest snowpack on record, you create fire behavior that can outrun the escape route, overwhelm the safety zone, and exceed what the shelter was ever built to survive. The crews this weekend, by everything we know, followed the doctrine, and the conditions were simply bigger than the doctrine. That is the answer. The mountain keeps winning because we keep making the mountain more flammable. And that, right there, is where the lies come in. Because there are people, a lot of them, with large audiences, who look at a fire like this and refuse to accept an answer that boring and that terrifying. They need a villain, so they invent one, and we need to talk about that, honestly. I need to talk to you now about what is already spreading across the internet, faster than the fire itself. Because the moment a disaster like this happens, a second fire starts, a fire of explanation. And the explanations being sold to millions of people right now are not just wrong, they are an insult to the 3 people who died this weekend. Let's take them one at a time, honestly. The first one you have probably already seen. The claim that this fire, and fires like it, are started by a directed energy weapon, a secret laser from a satellite or an aircraft, deliberately torching the American West. The evidence offered is always the same, a photo of a strangely bright fire, a house that burned while a tree nearby did not, a blue flash on someone's doorbell camera. Here is the physics, and it is not complicated. To ignite a forest from orbit, you would need to deliver an immense amount of focused energy through the entire atmosphere, energy that would bloom and scatter and heat everything in its path, not neatly torch one ridge while leaving the next one green. A weapon like that would be one of the most visible objects in the sky. It does not exist, and if it did, it could not do what these videos claim. Meanwhile, we have an actual, boring, verifiable explanation sitting right in front of us. Every credible investigation of recent catastrophic fires, including the Lahaina disaster in Hawaii in 2023, has traced ignition back to mundane causes. Power lines, sparks, dry vegetation, not energy weapons. And in this case, officials have already said the Cottonwood Fire was human-caused and is under investigation, which, as we covered, almost always means an ordinary spark in an extraordinary drought. The second claim builds on the first, that the fires are being set deliberately to drive people off their land, to clear rural areas so they can be replaced by planned, controlled developments. The land grab theory. But look at where this fire is actually burning. It is in the Fishlake National Forest. Public land, mountains, canyons, a damaged ski resort and scattered summer cabins. No one is being permanently displaced to build a futuristic city in the high desert of Beaver County. The evacuations are temporary, the way every wildfire evacuation is. This narrative gets recycled word for word after every major fire, and it never once produces the city it promises is coming. And the third claim is about the sky, that the drought itself is manufactured, that aircraft are spraying chemicals to suppress the rain and dry out the land. But we have already walked through the real, measured reason this land is so dry. A 24-year megadrought, the warmest winter on record low snowpack. These are documented, measured, peer-reviewed facts, tied to large-scale climate and ocean patterns that span entire oceans. No fleet of aircraft can switch a regional monsoon on or off. The atmosphere is simply too big. Now, I want to be fair, because there is a real debate here, and pretending there is not would make me no better than the people selling lasers. Scientists and land managers argue, genuinely and productively, about how much a century of aggressive fire suppression has allowed fuel to build up in these forests. They debate how much of the drought's severity is natural cycle versus a warming climate. They argue about where we should and should not allow people to build homes in the wildland-urban interface. Those are real, important, unresolved questions. That is where the honest argument lives. But here is the truth, and it is the most unsettling thing in this entire video. The conspiracy theories are, in a strange way, comforting. Because if a secret agency with a laser did this, then someone is in control. Someone could be stopped. The reality is so much worse. No one is in control. We dried out a landscape over 2.5 decades, we built homes in it, we keep providing the small, ordinary sparks, and now the land burns on a scale that overwhelms even the people we send to stop it. There is no villain at the controls. There is just physics and consequences, and that should frighten you far more than any laser. So where does this go from here? Let's look at the next few days honestly, with what we actually know, and I will flag clearly where we simply do not know yet. As of this recording, the Cottonwood Fire remains at 0% containment, the largest active wildfire in the country, still burning through difficult terrain that keeps the bulldozers and the engines out. Crews are fighting it on multiple fronts, using heavy equipment to scrape fuel breaks where they can get in, and air tankers and helicopters when the wind and smoke allow. But containment on a fire like this does not come from a dramatic last stand. It comes slowly, line by line, and usually it comes only when the weather finally breaks in the firefighters' favor. Until the wind drops and the humidity climbs, every forecast of strong gusts and single-digit humidity is another day the fire can run. That is why the next flashpoint on the calendar matters so much, the 4th of July. This is the 250th birthday of the country, and it is landing in the middle of the worst fire conditions Utah officials say they have seen in living memory. We have already covered why the state took the extraordinary step of banning fireworks. Now you understand it completely. The dominant cause of wildfires in Utah this year is not lightning, it is people. More than 3/4 of the acreage burned in the state this year traces back to human ignition. A single firework, in this drought, on a windy night, is not a celebration. It is a potential 100,000-acre fire. If you are anywhere in the dry West this week, the most patriotic thing you can do for your neighbors is to not be the spark. Then there is the threat that comes later, the one we talked about, the one that arrives with the rain. When the monsoon storms return to these burn scars, watch for flash flood and debris flow warnings, and take them as seriously as you would take the fire itself. If you live below a burn scar, know that the ground has changed, that water will now run off it like a parking lot, and that a debris flow can arrive with almost no warning. Know your evacuation route before you need it. And for the smoke, which is already spreading across multiple states, pay attention to your local air quality index, especially if you are older or very young or have a heart or lung condition. Now the honest unknowns, because I will not pretend to certainty I do not have. We do not yet know the final cause of the Cottonwood Fire. It is still under investigation. We do not yet know the names of the 3 firefighters who died, and we should wait for the families. We do not know how large this fire will ultimately grow, or whether the next red flag day will spawn another monster start somewhere else in the state. And we do not yet know how well a brand new federal fire agency, in its first deadly season, will hold its coordination together under this kind of strain. Those are open questions. When the answers come, and the verified data is in, we will come back to them, because that is the whole point of this channel. Real answers when they exist, honest uncertainty when they do not. Let me bring this all the way back to where we started, to that thin aluminum shelter and the 3 people who had to use it. At the beginning of this video, I told you that the state of Utah issued a fire weather warning it had never issued before, 2 full days before those firefighters died, and I promised you would understand why even that was not enough. Now you do. The warning was not a failure. It was as loud and as early as the science allows. The warning was not enough, because a warning cannot change the fuel. It cannot undo 24 years of drought, or put the snowpack back on the mountains, or make a slope of bone-dry oak brush behave like the wet forest it used to be. The forecasters did their job perfectly, and the land was still a bomb. That is the quiet, heavy feeling I told you the scientists carry. Not panic, something closer to grief, mixed with resolve. The understanding that we are living in a landscape we have changed, that the fires are getting bigger and faster than the systems we built to fight them, and that the people who walk toward those flames on our behalf are being asked to do something that is becoming, year by year, more impossible. 3 of them did not come home this weekend. 2 more are in the hospital, and somewhere, families are waiting by the phone. So here is what I would ask of you. When the names of those 3 firefighters are released, look them up, read them, say them. They were not statistics, and they were not props in anyone's conspiracy. They were people who ran toward the thing the rest of us run away from. And if you want to keep understanding the forces that are reshaping the ground under our feet, stay with me, because there is a story on the other side of the hemisphere you need to see. A few days ago, 2 faults slipped beneath a city in South America in the span of 39 seconds. 39 seconds, 2 massive earthquakes. And here is the part that should keep you up at night. The fault that did it is built almost exactly like the one running underneath California. The scientists cannot even agree on a basic question. Was it 1 earthquake or 2? The answer changes everything about what it means for the San Andreas. That is where we go next. I will see you there.